So, good afternoon, everybody. Just in the afternoon, 1 minute past midday. Good to see everybody, and welcome to the second in our series of Ask the Expert live events. And this event, as you can probably tell already, will be recorded, so I hope that's okay with everybody. Illuminare Education Live is about transforming complex and evolving regulations into practical solutions that support your quality initiatives. And we're utilising the power of informative lunchtime discussions to do that with. As this is a lunchtime discussion, rest assured there will be a space at the end for you to open your mics, ask any questions, or you can pop them in the chat at any time and I'll ask our expert on your behalf. So my name is Anita Wise. I'm Head of Quality and Compliance here at Illuminare Education, and my job today is to ask the questions. I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr Jude Pickering, who likes to be known as Jude, an Illuminare associate and today's expert. Just a bit of background on Jude. She's a highly experienced HE leader with a particular passion for student success. As a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy, she brings nearly 25 years of experience in the UK sector, including a distinguished career at the Open University in a variety of management and leadership roles. Since last year, Jude's extended her impact as an associate with Illuminare, where she uses her expertise to help clients shape their access and participation plans and provides training and support for them. So we've only got 45 minutes to fit everything in. We know there's going to be lots of questions. I've certainly got a few already. So please sit back. I'll just do a quick overview and then we'll ask the questions of Jude. Wherever you are on your APP journey, you're all very welcome. And if you're eating your lunch, that's absolutely fine. Please feel free, just maybe keep your mics off. So the overview. So access and participation plans, otherwise known as APPs, which you probably know, are documents created by HE providers in England to demonstrate how they would provide equality of opportunity for students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. These plans should cover a 4-year period and outline strategies and activities to address barriers to access, success, and progression in HE. They also need to provide measures and evaluate the impact of their interventions and how the provider will financially support those activities. So just to be clear, only providers wanting to access the higher tuition fee have to produce and have approved an APP by the Office for Students. If a provider is only accessing the basic tuition fee rate, they're required to just produce the access and participation statement. So that's just a bit of overview and enough of me talking. So Jude, thanks ever so much for coming along. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for the introduction. I want to take you everywhere with me now and introduce me wherever I go.
Well, it's been recorded, so you can snip it and take it.
Thank you.
So in that kind of overview, I mentioned about disadvantaged students. Can you give us an idea of the type of backgrounds that might be?
Yeah, sure. Well, generally speaking, disadvantage arises where someone or a group of individuals faces inequality of opportunity. Now, that's often due to social or systemic barriers. Now, unfortunately, those inequalities are perpetuated within the education system, and we see evidence of that right from early years all the way through to higher education. Now, the Office for Students has researched inequality in HE, and it's produced a risk register, and that's called the Equality of Opportunity Risk Register. Now, this has the really charming acronym of ORR, or EOR. So if you hear the word EOR in this context, I'm not referring to a character from the Winnie the Pooh books, but the OFS's risk register. Now, it's worth taking a look at that because it not only lists the 12 main risks to equality of opportunity facing our students in HE today, but it also maps those to the student characteristics that are most likely to experience those inequalities. So just as an example, some of the characteristics it lists are ethnicity, low household income, disability, commuter students are in there, as well as care experienced students and others. So do take a look.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. Now, I know one of the things that I've had before with clients, and it is there are quite a lot of backgrounds that are registered in the EOR. Do I need to include all of those or just some of them?
No. So that provide the OFS aren't expecting you to include all of them in your APP, particularly if you're a new provider as well. What they're looking for is quality, not quantity. So try not to spread yourself too thin and include sort of everything, but sort of look at your data and work out where your biggest priorities are, where are the biggest inequities that you see, and sort of which students are most impacted in terms of number or level of inequity, and focus on those areas first, or focus on areas where you think you can actually sort of make a change. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, great. Good, because there's a lot of them. But before we go on, because I am going to ask you about how I go about finding out which ones I should work on, can we just clarify some APP terminology? So there's lots of terminology in the access and participation plan process. Some of them are fairly new to HE and to some people. So I'm going to start off if you can give me a bit of a guide on each one. So the first one is intervention strategies. We hear that all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's just a fancy intervention strategy is just a fancy word or words for an activity or a group of activities that you've designed to address your risks to equality of opportunity. However, the key here is that those sort of intervention strategies or those activities need to be really well defined. So by that, I mean that they need to address a specific objective. So, for example, to ensure that students eligible for free school meals have equal opportunity to make a successful application to you as a provider by 2029, 2030. Okay. But it's also vital that the design of your intervention strategy is really robust. So it needs to be designed in such a way that you can measure its effectiveness. So because there's no point in investing the time and the energy in doing something if at the end you can't tell if it's worked or not. So a good intervention strategy will include a description of how the intervention will be evaluated.
Okay, fine. And there's probably lots of threads underneath that to get
Yeah.
to that point. Yeah, okay. So the next one is theory of change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a theory of change is a really useful tool, actually, which helps you to design intervention strategies. So it encourages you to take a stepwise approach. So you first of all you clarify the need you're trying to address, and then you focus on the intended objective. The objective is also referred to as a long-term outcome in this context. So it encourages you to define your long, medium term, and then your short term outcomes. At the same time, ensuring that you can identify ways to measure the success or the impact of those outcomes. And then you can work backwards from your outcomes to define the outputs you need to deliver those outcomes. And then finally, you capture the inputs and the activities that you need to deliver your outputs. Okay. So if you work in that way, in other words, working backwards from your intended objectives and outcomes to your inputs, to your outputs and your inputs, getting my tongue twisted up there, that ensures that throughout the process, you're always going to be focused on the outcomes you want to achieve rather than being too sort of activity focused. Okay, so it ensures rigor and it ensures that your activities are always aligned with your intended objective. Now, I would also always advise that your design of your intervention strategies, when you do that with theory of change or any approach, is always done as a collaborative activity. So by collaborating on this with key stakeholders, including your students, as well as those who will be involved in the implementation, it will make it much more likely that you will design something that will be successful and that will also, importantly, gain buy-in into a shared vision. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So in effect, what you've got is you get to the point. I think, and I'll ask some questions around this about getting to your intervention strategy, which is a whole process in itself.
Yeah.
But you get to that point of identifying an intervention strategy, and then you use the theory of change, working from that intervention strategy back to the what inputs you need, and therefore what outputs you'll get. And what you're doing is testing whether that intervention strategy is the right thing. So it's like a test, it's like a stress test of it before you actually confirm it.
Yeah, it's working out what is it you're trying to achieve, what inequality are you trying to address. So that's your objective. And then it's identifying, well, what steps do I need to take to achieve that objective? But it's working backwards. So it's okay. So you want to see sort of that's your long-term outcome, your objective. And what sort of shorter term things might you see? It might be the shorter term thing, might be a change in knowledge of your students. And then a medium-term outcome might be a change in their behaviour, which will lead to your longer-term outcome, which will be addressing sort of that inequality. But to achieve those outcomes, those changes in knowledge and skills and behaviour, you might need to put some outputs in place, which might be training courses or support. And therefore, what inputs do you need to deliver, or what activities do you need to deliver those, which might be designing the sort of the support process, and sort of writing the support program, and the inputs to that might be, well, you need to sort of pay a tutor or an AL or a lecturer to do that, or so it's tracking it back in that way.
Yeah. And I guess the theory of change and all this work that you do up front is really important, because these, just to reiterate again, these APPs have got to last 4 years, haven't you? So you've got to measure them over. So if, I guess, if you've got an intervention strategy and you've gone through a theory of change and it's only lasting you a year, you probably haven't got the right intervention strategy. You probably haven't got down to the root cause. Is that fair enough?
Well, you need to test. It takes a while to test. So you might find in that first year whether the students have gained the knowledge and the skills, but you're not going to know whether it's changed their behaviour until a bit later. So that's going to take some time. And then you've got to see, well, does that work over the course of several sort of years worth of your students going through that process, to see whether it sort of has genuinely delivered change and it's impacted upon their outcomes, and address that inequality. So but the important thing is, I think it helps when you define sort of short, medium and long-term outcomes. If your strategy isn't meeting those short-term outcomes, something's not right. Now, either you've not implemented it in a way that's going to work, so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, you might need to make some tweaks. Or it might be that your assumptions were wrong, and the approach you're taking, the intervention you're doing, the activity isn't actually what those students need. So you might need to rethink again. But by having short, medium and long-term outcomes, it encourages you to sort of be agile and think and tweak as you go along, and cut your losses. If something's not working, if you get a null response, if something's not working, celebrate that as well, because OFS want to hear about those and they want you to share that with the rest of the sector, so that no one else follows you down that path. Really important. But equally, if you find that something works, OFS are really keen for you to share those sort of at that sort of early stage, any sort of anything you're seeing. What you're evaluating, share that with the sector so that others can learn from you. It's about working as a community across the HE sector to make things better for all of our students. So that's certainly something that OFS are encouraging. So
okay,
don't be afraid to fail.
No, you're absolutely right. Because with the best will in the world, with the best data in the world, with the best insights in the world, it might still not be right, and that's okay.
And actually, at a conference this week, John Blake from OFS was at that conference, and he did say they're not expecting all these inequalities to be resolved in this next 4-year APP period. What they're really wanting the sector to work on in this 4-year period is to actually set their interventions up in a robust way, to really get into sort of habit of robust design and really robust evaluation, so that you can actually work out then what works and what doesn't, and build those skill sets within your institution. So they're not expecting the moon on a stick straight away. It's about they're supporting the sector to move in the right direction. So
it's almost kind of implementing the process, getting that process right. I mean, and something you mentioned earlier, which is another kind of terminology that's talked about a lot in APP planning, is that whole provider approach. And like we were saying, that you definitely need somebody leading it. There's no doubt about that. You need somebody with their eye on the ball all the time, leading it, and that could be one or two people. But they can't do that in isolation. It doesn't matter how big or small the provider is. Everybody needs to be involved, right? So this whole provider approach, how would you sum that up?
Yeah, so quite rightly, OFS want to encourage providers to really embrace a culture, whereas everybody's responsibility to address inequality. So the responsibility to say and the accountability shouldn't be shouldered by one or two individuals in the team or those that are responsible for writing the APP. So that's why the collaborative approach that I spoke about when I was talking about theories of change and developing your intervention strategies, that's why that taking that collaborative approach actually is so useful in this context, because it does encourage engagement of a wide range of stakeholders in the design and implementation of this work. And importantly, it encourages you to involve your students in that as well. So, however, taking a whole provider approach goes beyond that as well. There's an expectation that addressing inequality is built into the culture, the strategy, the governance of your institution. Okay, so the OFS expects you to be really explicit about that and about that, how that aligns with how the APP and your approach to the APP aligns with your existing strategies. So in your APP, you're going to need to articulate how progress towards delivering the aims and the objectives of your APP is going to be reported, and it's going to be monitored up through the governance of your institution to ensure that you get engagement and you're getting support from the top of your organisation for these efforts, really. So it is about a whole provider buy-in to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So just moving back to intervention strategies, but so we've gone through some of the terminology, but I just want to go back to that intervention strategy, because we talked about intervention strategy and theory of change. So that's, you've got your intervention strategy and how you're going to measure it and what's it going to be made up of over the 4-year period, and the inputs and the outputs and the objectives and the targets.
Yeah.
But how do we get to the intervention strategy? Now, I have helped with, as you have on numerous occasions, helped with access and participation. And it seems to be a lot about data and trying to collect evidence and data. So if I'm a smaller provider or a newer provider and I don't have a lot of data, what do I do?
Okay, well,
and can I still do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you'd be surprised. You might have some data. You might sort of be able to sort of see what your course pass rates for your different students, broken down by different student characteristic. And if you've been around for a little while, and if you're an existing provider as well, actually OFS will hold data on you within their APP data dashboard. And you can actually access that from the OFS website. So I do encourage you to have a little look at that. Now, that includes data for individual HE providers across different student characteristics, and it splits it down as well by each stage of the student journey. So it helps you to pinpoint where you might have some sort of risks. So it splits it down by, get this in the right order, access, continuation, completion, attainment and progression. Okay, so look at your data if you have data in that APP dashboard, and then see if you can spot any differences in outcomes for your students according to particular student characteristics. So, for example, you might have worse continuation rates for students who are eligible versus those who weren't eligible for free school meals. And if you spot differences like that in your data, that's what we call, and what OFS call, indicators of risk. Okay, so that's the data's way of waving and flagging a potential inequality. So sort of look at that. You can then refer back to the OFS's EOR, the Equality of Opportunity Risk Register, and that maps various known indicators of risk, as well as student characteristics, and it maps both of those to specific risks that we see across sector-wide, across the sector, such as insufficient academic support or cost pressures for students. Okay, so that will give you a really good starting point to select possible risks that specific groups of your students may be exposed to. But if you're a really new provider and you don't have much data going back years, you could also look at the data of other providers who are similar to you in terms of their location, their type of student that they attract, the sort of courses they put on. Or you could simply just consider the makeup of your students and what sort of student characteristics you have present within your population of students. And then you can use the EOR to guide you to narrow down potential areas of risk based upon the characteristics of your student population. So you do need to start collecting data about what your student population are, what their characteristics are, okay? So if you do that, I think I would, if you do any of this, and irrespective of what approach you take, I strongly advocate that you consult and engage with your students, okay? Specifically those in the affected groups, because that data will tell you one thing. It tells you where the risks are, but it doesn't really enable you to gain an insight into the causes of those inequalities and the causes of those sort of issues for your students. So by consulting and engaging with your students will help you to better understand the challenges they face.
Yeah, and that could just be putting a message out to all students, couldn't it? Looking for those kind of students that are in those disadvantaged, and maybe just getting a focus group. I mean, that might just be getting them sitting around a table, telling them what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it, and asking for their stories.
Yeah, but don't forget, some students with particular sort of disadvantage, they often don't feel like they belong. There's a belonging issue. And also some students, depends on what makeup of students you have, they might just be juggling so many things that asking them to take time out to also be consulted is a challenge. So you need to make that consultation process attractive to your students, either by offering sort of financial incentives or sort of showing that it can actually help add to their CV, make it an engaging and an interesting process as well. So there are things that you can do to really enhance your approach to student engagement, because there's a risk that you'll then, if you don't do that, you'll engage and get feedback from those students that have the time to do it. And probably those students that have that time to be engaged are probably not really the students that are likely to experience the most disadvantage. So you'll end up with biased and skewed insight. So it's really important that you try to reach out and get that diversity of student input.
Yeah, and I think, and again, one of the things I think I would do if I was doing this, I would probably, obviously do lots of different types of things. So maybe I'd do an online form, or I would do, like I say, a face-to-face focus group and an online focus group. But I'd also probably speak to the tutors who probably know their students really, really well. And although you might not know them very well if you're leading it, you could get the tutors involved in encouraging them to come along. And I guess you're right with things like commuter students and mature students. They're working, they've got families, and really last on the list is the study thing. So if you can find ways of maybe doing it out of hours, either early morning, like breakfast clubs and giving them breakfast, or later on in the evening, whichever way. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. There's not one approach, is there? You're trying to get lots of approaches to capture as many voices as possible.
Really, and to talk to your students, find out if the approaches you're taking, do they feel that it's working? Do they feel like that do they feel consulted? And do they feel that you're then reporting back on the findings, so you're keeping them in the loop? And then as your APP progresses and as you sort of progress and you develop intervention strategies and activities, feed that back to them. There's nothing better that students like to hear is then, you said this, you spent your time telling us the sort of what the issues are for you. We heard you, and this is now what we're doing. It's like you said, we did. Keep that feedback loop going as well. But that's really important to sort of maintain with your student body.
And then it's really, really good advice. I think it's, it sounds like it's a daunting thing, but actually, if you don't ask the people that are actually affected, you may be missing a trick, basically.
Well, it pays dividends as well, because another element of your access and participation plan submission is OFS want to hear from your student body. So they encourage your students to submit their own commentary on your APP alongside your APP, and that goes to the APP assessors. So the students are encouraged to comment on the degree to which they were consulted and engaged in the development of your APP, the degree to which the risks that you have highlighted and you are prioritising addressing within your APP are actually the risks that they experience. So it's just, and you as a provider are not able or not allowed to influence that student submission. You have to support students to put it together, but you can't influence what they write in there.
Do you ever get to see what they've written?
They don't have to share it with you, but yeah, if you built a good relationship with your students, I'm sure they will share it with you, but they don't have to. You will get to see it once, because you do get to sort of comment back on it to the OFS if you wish to. But I would hope if you've taken the effort to engage your students and bring them along with you, involve them in the co-design of those sort of intervention strategies and those activities, and feed back to them along the way, that your students are going to feel like you have engaged with them, and they'll be very happy to share their submission with you. And the submission would be a glowing report on your approach. That would be that's the end, isn't it?
Yeah.
So bear that in mind. It's
okay.
really important to engage your students throughout the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's good. Just going to go back to data again. So one of the things, again, whenever I'm asking questions, or when you're giving responses, I'm thinking, what would I do if it was me? And I know that when it comes to kind of student history and data, again, if you're a new provider or a smaller provider, and at this point, you may not be required to give all statutory returns to the OFS, depending on the level of activity you've got going with them. But I think what I would do is maybe look at the student record system that I've got from a admissions, recruitment, enrollments type of thing, and maybe look at the EOR and the student characteristics, and maybe build some of that into the enrollment process or the registration process. Is that fair to say? Because they don't have to complete it, do they? But where we can encourage them to complete it right at the very beginning, even if you decide, right, I don't think I've got the resources or whatever to go into an APP now, it's something that you can do now, irrelevant of that, is to actually start capturing that data. Is that the right way to look at it? Is to look at the or look at the student characteristics?
Yeah, I think the more data is sort of really useful, isn't it? It's a really useful tool. As I say, it doesn't tell you everything. It gives you indications, and that student, talking to the students and getting the student voice is really important. But that data enables you to sort of see what groups what types of students you have, what characteristics they have, and you can then find ways of mapping that data to your student outcomes. Will really help you when it comes to trying to identify where sort of your students' challenges lie, where you might be sort of inadvertently putting barriers in the way of students being as successful as they have the capability of being. So yeah, I think starting now, starting as soon as you can, sort of gather that data and try to disaggregate it as much as possible. Don't be tempted just to collect data on students that are BAME, Black, ethnic minority sort of groups. Try to split that down into the different student characteristics, different ethnicities, because different ethnicities, for example, experience different challenges. So try to get it as fine-grained as you can. But as I say, if you are an existing provider, OFS will be doing a lot of that legwork for you through if you're doing your HESA returns, sort of sort of that sort of data, that's what is being pulled into the APP dashboard already for you. So so just take a look at that, see what you're collecting, because you've got the HESA data, the individual learner record data. You'll also have sort of national student pupil data. Even before your pupils get to you, you can tell sort of like what their prior learning was like and whether they accepted free school meals or not. And then if you already have graduates, you'll have graduate outcome data, all of which will be in that APP dashboard. So have a little look at that, and but there may be additional data that you want to collect about students.
And again, I think because the title is access and participation, a lot of people focus on just the access element of it, don't they? But the OFS are looking for that, you know, the whole student journey. So still being able to report disaggregated data by how, you know, continuation and, you know, and how successful they're doing year on year or module by module. So that's really important as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so see what you can. The more data you can gather, the better. But if you haven't got that already, don't panic. No, there are different approaches you can take, as we've talked about.
Yeah. So the OFS have like strategic goals themselves for access and participation, don't they? And I know one of them is around mental health. Could you just talk a little bit around that and what they're looking for there?
Yeah, well, actually, OFS have, in terms of the sort of characteristics of students, they've got a couple of characteristics that they are particularly keen for us to incorporate into our APPs this time round. So, yeah, right, mental health is one of those. We've seen for students, we see it daily in the news. Students' mental health isn't great, and there is a responsibility on universities to support students with mental health difficulties. And we see time and again that students who have declared mental health difficulties, their outcomes tend to be worse than students who sort of don't have those disabilities. And that goes all the way through, right from sort of continuation, completion, and progression as well. So sort of finding out sort of what challenges those students sort of face and how to address those, how you can address those, I think is something that the OFS are really keen that every provider focuses on. We've seen some horrible headlines, haven't we? So it's important that universities sort of do focus in on that particular topic. The other area that OFS are really keen in terms of a strategic priority is to address sort of attainment. So they're keen that we work with schools and pre-16 educational providers to reverse sort of the inequalities we've seen in terms of outcomes for students at sort of GCSE level. Because since the pandemic, we were getting much more equality of outcomes, and the pandemic hit. And we suddenly sort of seen a scattering of that, so much more inequality, which is really alarming. So the government and therefore OFS want to try to do everything they can to reverse that. So they are looking to higher educational providers to support schools and sort of colleges to to work in that area. So how can we raise the attainment and the aspirations of those students as they progress through the education system, right from early years all the way through to sort of pre-16, and then support in terms of application to university as well. So that's another area that they really want.
And they call that pre-16 attainment, don't they? That's what the terms you, okay.
Yeah. So those are two things to look out for as well.
Yeah, and I think and again, I know when I first started working on APPs, the pre-16 attainment, I really had to think about that. Like, how on earth can a university affect a local secondary school, for instance? You know, what on earth can they do? But and you can tell this is live because I was just about to say something and I can't remember the term for it. But there is like a DFE OFS collaboration events, isn't there? There's
Oh,
what's it called?
Uni Connect.
Yes, UniConnect, thank you. So, and I have to say, when I first looked at UniConnect, I did think, actually, this is great. So, and as we don't have any questions coming in at the moment, I'm just gonna, this is kind of an off the top of my head one, but with the pre-16 attainment, I found using UniConnect and going into that website and the basis of it, the formation of it, was really helpful. Because again, if I was a university myself, or you know, a higher education college myself, what is it that can actually do to help secondary schools or primary schools? And actually going through the UniConnect, if you could you explain that a little bit for me?
Well, UniConnect was a program that connected sort of universities, HEs with other sort of schools, and encouraged different programs and projects for them to do. So you can have a look at that UniConnect site, and it gives you loads of ideas of what sort of those partnerships have done and what they've achieved. Things like supporting teacher development, running workshops for students to help them sort of with their literacy, or going in and talking to sort of students about careers prospects, and trying to demystify HE as well, but just to sort of help support. Generally, there's lots of different avenues that you could take, and it's what's really lovely is it's linking higher education providers with schools and institutions, pre-16 sort of institutions in the local area. So it's doing that sort of lovely outreach work. I think UniConnect has kind of sort of paused at the moment, and what John Blake and OFS are looking at doing at the minute is trying to bring that approach back. They're sort of articulating this in very sort of like it's very early days in their thinking, but they're trying to look at encouraging that partnership again through they're thinking about sort of getting HEs to collaborate and coordinate their APP applications and submissions in their sort of more regional areas to again encourage regional collaboration and coordination, and support for that sort of that pipeline of students and their sort of their learning all the way through from pre-16, and sort of meeting employers' needs as well in the local area. So looking at skills and knowledge gaps that local employers want, and getting sort of encouraging the universities to support their local area, their schools, colleges, employers, other agencies, to sort of help plug the needs of their local community in terms of skills and experience, and research as well. So they're looking at sort of like those sort of that regional approach. It's very early days. I've not heard much more about it, so it's something to keep an eye on and see what direction of travel that goes in. But that could have quite big ramifications for how APPs are submitted.
Yeah.
You can sort of imagine that if everyone has to sort of submit their APP at the same time within a region, how's that going to work? What's that going to look like when you've got big providers and sort of smaller providers? So that'd be really interesting to see how the dynamic of that works. But it also provides opportunities for those smaller providers to actually, because you're going to be much more agile than some of the bigger ones, but also sort of picking up on some training or some sort of courses that maybe the bigger providers just can't do. So you could look at maybe the smaller providers becoming more specialist.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's interesting to see how this evolves over time. But as I say, it's really early days. I haven't really heard much more about that. So something just to keep a watchful eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also with the deregulation and the new regulator for Skills England as well, which hopefully soon will start to give us a framework for what the employers are looking for in terms of skills, and chuck that into the mix as well. But yeah, it's going to be, well, I mean, it's just an ever moving world at the moment in HE, let alone FE and, schools, etc. So Yeah, and I guess that's why we're trying to build these chats to try and demystify a lot of it and bring some humanity to it, because I think we need to talk more about all of this stuff.
But it's massively changing, isn't it? So yeah, it's really good to sort of discuss these points and learn together as we go and share experiences. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's a really exciting time. But
yeah,
definitely the government and OFS are putting sort of much more focus on the responsibility that HEs have to their students, quite rightly, because students invest a lot of their time and their own finances into the courses that they sign up for. So it's really important that us as providers provide the best possible experience for them, provide them with value for money, and enable them to attain those successes that they're looking for
yeah,
out of that university or HE experience.
yeah. So that's been brilliant. I can't believe it's 12:40 already. That's been absolutely fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I really hope that it helps our colleagues out there that are looking at APP or thinking about it. Hopefully we've not completely put you off. There is a lot to it. There's no doubt about it. You do need a lead, you do need a champion, but hopefully the message has come across that it needs to be from the board of governors right up from the top all the way down, and everybody needs to be included, particularly those students that are actually affected by this. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thanks ever so much, Jude. You've just been, a plethora of information. It's been fantastic. And thank you so much. So many insights there. I know we've got some workshops coming up, and we do deliver these workshops in much more detail. If anybody's interested, you can have a look on the Illuminare website. But fundamentally, this isn't a sales pitch. This is genuinely about trying to just unpick all of this stuff. So I've really appreciated that. And that's it from us, really. If you want to know any more, if you've got any questions, if you look at this recording back and you want to know any more, just give me a shout, basically. Anita Wise, Anita at Luminaire Education. You can find my email address on the website, and be happy to kind of talk a little bit more if you want to, or if you're interested in coming on and being an expert about something else, come along. That'll be fantastic. But in the meantime, Jude, thanks so much for that. Have a brilliant May bank holiday weekend. Enjoy the weather. Fingers crossed it stays. And I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anita. Bye.
Bye.